Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive.
Oh, yeah, this is going to be a good one.
We're going to be talking about Carter G. Woodson's book, The Miseducation of the Negro.
Now, this book, it's from 1933.
Yeah, almost 100 years ago.
But honestly, it's crazy how relevant it still is today.
Like, one of the first things that really struck
Oh,
me
I know what you're going to say.
was how Woodson just comes right out and compares miseducation to the worst sort of lynching.
Talk about a powerful image, right?
It really makes you stop and think about the power of education.
Right, like it can either lift you up or it can absolutely crush you.
And for Woodson, miseducation was like a death sentence.
It was killing the potential of Black people.
And it wasn't just about the lack of education.
Oh, he saw it as a deliberate system.
Like designed to make Black people feel inferior.
And keep them down.
He even tells this story.
Oh, yeah, the one about the instructor at the Black summer school.
Yeah, and this white instructor is using a textbook that's basically preaching white supremacy.
Can you imagine that?
It's like going to a school that's supposed to be empowering you.
And then being told that you're inherently inferior.
It's just mind-boggling.
It really shows how insidious miseducation can be.
Right. It's not always this blatant, in-your-face kind of thing.
Sometimes it's hidden in the curriculum itself.
And that's what Woodson really exposes in the book.
He shows how Black contributions are just systematically erased.
In all these different subjects.
Like geography, for example.
Yeah, you barely even hear about Africa.
Yeah, when you do.
Black people are portrayed as being at the bottom rung.
Exactly.
And then you have history.
Where the entire curriculum is basically void of any African achievements.
It's like this constant narrative that Black people haven't contributed anything to the world.
That's just not true.
And it's not just history and geography either.
No, even in professional fields.
Like law and medicine.
The training materials were full of messages
that associated Black people with criminality and disease.
It's just crazy to think about how this was happening.
Yeah, it really makes you question everything you've been taught.
Right, like where else might these hidden biases be lurking?
And that's a key question that Woodson forces us to confront.
He wants us to think critically about the education we're receiving.
And he's especially critical of the kind of education
that pushes Black people to just imitate white society.
Right. It's like this idea that you have to assimilate.
To be successful.
But it comes at a cost.
You lose your own unique talents and self-reliance.
Like this gilded cage.
You might look successful on the outside,
but you're not really free.
And Woodson illustrates this point
with a story about his own time at Harvard.
Yeah, he was studying all these ancient philosophers.
Well, one of his friends was studying wool.
A more practical skill, you could say.
And guess what?
His friend ended up becoming wealthy.
And Woodson uses this to show the disconnect between classical education
and the skills that you actually need
to achieve economic empowerment.
It's like, what good is a fancy education
if it doesn't translate into any real power?
And that leads to another one of Woodson's sharp observations.
He noticed that some highly educated Black people,
they actually end up defending the very system that benefits them,
even if it harms the masses.
It's a tough truth to swallow.
But it highlights the need for education that's actually relevant
to the lives of Black people.
Education that gives them the tools they need
to make a real difference in their communities.
Woodson called these common sense schools.
Places where knowledge translates into power.
Not just prestige.
And speaking of power,
Woodson was incredibly critical of any education that failed to prepare Black people
for economic self-sufficiency.
He called it the first essential of civilization.
And he had this great story.
Oh yeah, about the young woman fresh out of business school?
Who couldn't understand why she couldn't live on a $15 weekly salary.
She had the ambition.
But the education system totally failed her.
It didn't give her the real-world skills she needed
to actually make a living.
And Woodson contrasts this
with the willingness of white graduates
to work apprenticeships for free.
Just to gain that experience.
It really highlights the different starting lines.
The different obstacles that Black people face.
When it comes to achieving economic independence.
It's a really important point that Woodson makes.
Now, one institution that Woodson doesn't shy away from tackling,
and this is a good one,
is the Black church.
He has a very complex view of the church.
He sees it as a source of both uplift
and, unfortunately, exploitation.
He tells this story about attending a large Black church
and realizing that he and Kelly Miller were the only two college graduates there.
Wow, that's striking.
It really shows the divide
between the so-called talented 10th
and the rest of the Black community.
And Woodson is critical of some of the ministers.
The ones who preach these eloquent but empty sermons
that don't actually address the real needs of the people.
He contrasts them with the preachers,
who might not have as much formal education,
but who connect on a much deeper level.
with the spiritual needs of the congregation.
It's a fascinating take on authenticity versus academic credentials.
And Woodson goes even further.
He delves into the financial burdens
They're placed on the black community.
by all the denominational divisions.
All these different churches and bishops,
It's almost like a critique of the business of religion itself.
draining resources from the community.
And here's where it gets really thought-provoking.
Woodson argues that theology itself,
Can be a tool of oppression.
used to justify things like slavery and segregation,
It's a bold statement.
but it forces us to examine,
How even our most sacred beliefs.
can be manipulated to maintain power structures.
It's a powerful insight.
And it leads us to another crucial aspect of Woodson's analysis.
Political disengagement.
He shows how political education is deliberately suppressed.
To keep black people from participating in civic life.
You remember that story he tells about the high school principal?
The one who got fired just for joking that he was old enough to vote.
It's crazy how much they tried to silence black voices.
Even the slightest hint of political expression.
Could be met with severe consequences.
And Woodson connects this to the way history is taught.
The lack of open political dialogue,
It creates this culture of apathy and fear.
where people are afraid to even think about their own political power.
And, of course, Woodson calls out the white political bosses.
The ones who exploit black leaders for votes.
And then offer nothing but empty promises in return.
It's like this illusion of power.
Designed to keep black people in their place.
And then comes one of the most provocative arguments in the entire book.
I know what you're going to say.
Woodson says that the black community needs more workers.
Not leaders.
Now, he's not saying leadership isn't important.
But he criticizes the way it's often emphasized.
Like it's the only path to success,
Especially when those leadership roles are sought after for personal gain.
rather than for genuine community uplift.
He even shares stories.
About highly educated black people
Who get caught up in these petty squabbles.
over trivial positions.
And it ends up hindering progress and unity.
It makes you think about where true power really lies.
Is it in the title?
Or is it in the work itself?
And how often do the people with the loudest voices?
Actually get things done.
It's a great question to ask.
And Woodson connects this back to history.
He points out how leadership was often imposed on the black community
By white oppressors.
as a way to control them.
It's this classic divide and conquer
You
strategy.
need a few figureheads.
Give them a little bit of power.
And then use them to keep the masses in check.
It's pretty chilling when you think about it.
But it underscores Woodson's call for self-determination.
For building power from within.
Not seeking validation from the outside.
And that leads us to Woodson's vision.
For a radically different kind of education.
One that's centered on the black experience.
And that empowers true liberation.
I'm definitely eager to hear more about that.
Oh yeah, it's coming right up. So Woodson, this education he envisions, it starts with really understanding the Negro, their history, their culture, their lived experiences.
It's about centering their own narrative, right?
Exactly reclaiming their own intellectual heritage.
Like a complete 180 from the kind of education they were forced into for so long.
Not about imitation anymore.
No, it's about self-development,
Economic empowerment.
giving people the tools to challenge the systems that are oppressing them.
Yeah, like cultivating critical thinking, not just blind acceptance.
And I love how he emphasizes studying black culture,
Not just as some academic subject.
but as a living, breathing source of knowledge and power.
Yeah, like a source of strength.
And he tells this story about this white Mississippian professor
Oh yeah, I remember that one.
working with a black Georgian student to document everyday sayings of black people.
Like, why are we spending all this time on ancient Greek philosophers
When there's this rich, vibrant culture right here,
right in our own backyard?
totally overlooked,
That's miseducation for you.
blinded by our own biases.
Exactly. Woodson wants to shift that focus, reclaim that intellectual space.
Empower black people to tell their own stories.
Now, this next idea might sound a little counterintuitive.
Oh yeah, this is where things get interesting.
Woodson talks about using segregation itself as a tool for liberation.
Wait, what?
I know it sounds crazy, right?
How can segregation be a tool for anything good?
Well, he's not advocating for segregation, of course.
Of course.
But he acknowledges the reality of it.
That it existed.
And he suggests that instead of just waiting for integration,
We could take who knows how long.
Black people should leverage the resources and talents within their own communities
So it's about turning a system of oppression.
into a catalyst for self-reliance.
Wow, that's a powerful way to look at it.
And he quotes Frederick Douglass, who said, We must become valuable to society and other departments of industry than those servile ones from which we are rapidly being excluded.
It's about creating a parallel system,
A thriving ecosystem of Black businesses, banks, professionals,
all supporting each other.
building a foundation for true economic independence.
And this is where Woodson gets really practical.
He starts talking about the specifics of economic empowerment.
Like learning a trade, gaining those hands-on skills.
That can lead to self-sufficiency.
It reminds me of his critique of that young woman.
Who couldn't make ends meet on a $15 salary?
He's not blaming her.
No, he's blaming the system that failed to equip her with the tools she needed to succeed.
Like, look, you can have all the book smarts in the world.
But if you don't know how to manage your money, how to start a business, how to navigate the real world,
You're still going to be stuck.
he contrasts that with the willingness of some white graduates
And work apprenticeships for free.
just to get that practical experience.
It's a reminder of the different playing fields.
His different expectations.
Now, another point Woodson makes.
About the highly educated,
Yeah, this one's tough but important.
he observed that many educated Black people, instead of using their knowledge to challenge the status quo,
They actually become more invested in maintaining it.
like they become complicit in the very system that's oppressing them.
It's almost like they've been brainwashed.
In a way, they've internalized the values of the oppressor,
And they become more concerned with personal advancement,
defending the system that benefits them.
even if it means turning a blind eye to the struggles of the masses.
It's a tough pill to swallow,
But it's a reality we have to confront.
and it raises the question,
What good is knowledge
if it's not used to uplift others?
if it's not used to make a positive impact on the world?
That's the challenge Woodson is putting before us.
And it leads him to explore the role of the Black church,
Ah, yes, a complex institution.
with both its strength and its weaknesses.
He acknowledges its importance as a source of community.
Support even leadership during times of oppression,
But he doesn't shy away from critiquing its shortcomings.
like the financial burden it places on the community,
All the denominational divisions, the proliferation of churches and bishops.
constant demands for financial support
It's almost like he sees the church as part of a system,
that keeps Black people focused on the afterlife.
rather than improving their conditions in the present.
And he even goes so far as to argue,
That theology itself can be a tool of oppression.
used to justify slavery, segregation, all sorts of injustices.
It's a bold statement.
But it challenges us to examine,
Even those institutions we hold sacred.
to ask ourselves if our beliefs are truly aligned with justice and equality.
Or if we're clinging to traditions that ultimately perpetuate harm,
It's a call for critical thinking
for questioning our assumptions.
and for demanding more from our institutions.
And that brings us to another crucial aspect of Woodson's analysis.
Political disengagement.
He argues that political education is deliberately suppressed.
To keep Black people from actively participating in civic life. Remember that story he shared?
About the high school principal who got fired.
For just joking about being old enough to vote?
It's a stark reminder.
Of how Black political expression was stifled.
Even the slightest hint of it
Could be met with severe consequences.
And Woodson links this to the biased history textbooks.
The lack of open political dialogue.
It creates this culture of apathy and fear.
Where people are afraid to even think about their own political power.
And he calls out the white political bosses,
Who exploit Black leaders for votes.
offering empty promises in return,
It's the illusion of power.
designed to maintain the status quo.
And then he throws out this really provocative proposition.
Oh yeah, I love this one.
He says the Black community needs more workers, not leaders.
Now, before you jump to conclusions,
I know it sounds counterintuitive,
he's not saying leadership isn't important,
but he's critiquing the way it's often emphasized,
like it's the only path to success,
especially when those leadership roles are sought after for personal gain.
rather than for genuine community uplift.
He's saying that true power lies in service,
In using your skills and talents to uplift your community.
not in seeking positions of authority or prestige,
He wants to see a shift from the pursuit of individual ambition.
to a focus on collective action and shared responsibility,
He believes that true progress comes from working together.
not from jockeying for positions of power,
And he connects this back to the history of Black leadership
pointing out how those roles were often imposed on the community
by white oppressors.
as a means of control. It's a classic divide and conquer strategy,
Create a few figureheads, give them a little bit of power.
and then use them to keep the masses in check.
It's a sobering thought.
But it underscores Woodson's call for self-determination,
Building power from within.
not seeking validation or permission from the outside,
And this leads him to outline his vision
for a radically different kind of education.
One that starts with a deep understanding of Black history, culture, and lived experience.
It's about centering their own narratives, reclaiming their own intellectual heritage.
Exactly. It's a complete reversal of the miseducation he's been critiquing.
So it's not about imitation anymore.
No, it's about empowerment.
It's about equipping Black people with the tools they need
To understand their own history.
to celebrate their own culture.
And to challenge the systems that have oppressed them for so long.
It's about instilling a sense of pride, self-reliance, and a commitment to social justice.
And that's where Woodson's ideas about economic empowerment and education really come together.
He saw them as interconnected.
He believed that education should be more than just about acquiring knowledge,
It should also be about developing the skills and the mindset.
needed to build a better future.
So it's not just about surviving,
It's about thriving.
creating your own opportunities, breaking free from that cycle of dependence.
He wants to see an education that prepares Black people to be entrepreneurs,
To start businesses, to create jobs.
to build wealth within their own communities.
It's about fostering that spirit of self-reliance and innovation.
That he sees as essential for the long-term progress of the Black community.
And he emphasizes supporting Black-owned businesses,
Investing in Black communities
creating a system of mutual support,
that can challenge the dominant economic order.
building power from within,
Creating a parallel autonomy that can operate independently.
of the systems that have historically excluded and exploited Black people.
Now that's a vision worth fighting for.
And it all starts with education
With reclaiming our minds and our history.
and with understanding the power we have.
To create a better future for ourselves and our communities.
You know, it's like Woodson is giving us this blueprint,
Yeah, not just complaining about the problems.
right? He's showing us a path forward, a way to build a better future.
Especially for the Black community.
And a big part of that vision,
Is this idea of Black people using their own talents and resources.
creating their own systems of support and success.
Exactly. Why wait for permission from the very structures that have been holding you back?
Build your own tables.
Right? Create your own opportunities. Define your own success.
He uses this example.
Oh yeah, the Black communities in the North in the early 1900s.
Facing all this discrimination,
But they didn't just sit around and complain.
they built their own businesses,
Why?
banks, hospitals, even insurance companies.
Talk about resilience, right?
It's incredible.
It's that spirit of self-reliance.
Taking ownership of your destiny.
Not waiting for handouts.
And that leads us to Woodson's vision for Black leadership.
This new kind of leadership,
Rooted in service and a genuine commitment to uplift the community.
not about personal gain or token positions,
He's talking about leaders who are willing to sacrifice.
for the greater good,
Leaders who are dedicated to building institutions that empower others.
and who understand that true leadership is about service.
Not about self-aggrandizement.
Like Booker T. Washington,
Oh, yeah, he's a great example.
the legacy he built at Tuskegee Institute.
Washington understood that true empowerment came from building that strong economic base.
And giving Black people the skills they needed to succeed.
In a society that was working against them,
And Woodson challenges us.
to follow in Washington's footsteps.
Create institutions that truly serve the community.
Leave a legacy of achievement that will inspire others.
Now, this vision of a self-sufficient and empowered Black community.
It's all tied back to Woodson's ideas about education.
He was adamant that education could either liberate or oppress.
And he was so critical of the traditional education system.
The one that was failing Black students.
All that rote memorization, abstract knowledge,
That had no relevance to their lives.
and the constant pressure to imitate white culture.
He called for a radical shift.
An education grounded in the Black experience
That celebrated Black history and culture.
and equipped Black students with the practical skills they needed.
To thrive in the real world.
He wanted schools that taught Black children about their own history,
Their own heroes and heroines.
their own capacity to shape the world.
He believed that kind of education could instill such a strong sense of pride and self-reliance.
And a commitment to social justice.
It would be transformative for the Black community.
And that brings us back to one of the most important takeaways from the miseducation of the Negro.
That education can be both a weapon and a tool.
A force for oppression or liberation.
It all depends on how it's used.
It's a reminder that the knowledge we acquire, the stories we're told, the ways we're taught to think.
They shape our understanding of ourselves and the world.
Woodson's work is a call to be critical thinkers
To question the narratives we're given.
and to demand an education that empowers us.
To think for ourselves, to challenge injustice, and to create a better future.
And his message is still so relevant today,
Almost a century later.
maybe even more so now.
as we face new challenges and new forms of oppression.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Into Woodson's powerful ideas.
the question we're left with is this.
What are we doing to make sure our own education
Whether it's formal or informal,
is truly liberating
are we seeking out knowledge that expands our understanding of the world?
and empowers us to make a difference?
Are we supporting institutions and organizations
That are working to dismantle systems of oppression?
and create a more just and equitable society?
Are we using our voices to challenge injustice?
And to advocate for change?
These are the questions that Woodson's work forces us to ask.
And they're questions that we should all be thinking about.
No matter our background or identity,
Because the struggle for liberation is a collective one.
we all have a role to play.
In creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Woodson's legacy is a call to action.
An invitation to use our knowledge, our resources, and our voices.
To create a more just and equitable world.
It's a challenge to examine our own beliefs
To challenge the status quo.
and to commit ourselves to the ongoing work of liberation.
It's a journey we're all on together.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the miseducation of the Negro,
We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
and most importantly, empowering.
Keep those questions in mind.
And keep pushing for a better world.